Helmet. The album is Meantime, comes out in 1992. Why does this album mean so much to you? I'm going to be honest. I had heard of the band Helmet. I hadn't heard a single song from the band before. So I listened to the
For
album in its
shame.
entirety. Yeah. I listened to the album in its entirety. It is awesome. It is heavy. It is badass. You can hear the influence that it would have on all these metal,
Where do you
new
think the
metal,
Deftones came from?
alternative.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So can you share why this album means so much to you?
Well, that one in particular, well, that one came out. So you said 1990, right? Is that
92.
the 92? So that came out still when prior to grunge rock really taking over, right? Like,
Well, 991 was Nevermind, so that's the peak of grunge. But then
well, that's a very, yeah.
94 is Korn's debut that starts technically new metal. So it was 2 years prior to Korn blowing up.
And you know who played guitar on that first Korn record is Paige Hamilton from Helmet. And so it's and
The
Paige
influence.
also played with David Bowie after Stevie Ray Vaughan. Paige Hamilton is this remarkable musician in Helmet who I've always wondered about his guitar solos. My educated guess on that is because he's a Juilliard classically trained musician as well. My guess on that is that he's intentionally playing every single note that's out of key to create an intense amount of tension, and so that at the end of the it gets released at the end of that because it comes back into key, and so you're creating this tension that makes your teeth grind. And but for me, that Helmet really came out at a time when a lot of that 80s stuff was like really bubbling over, where Poison was really massive still. And I guess that's when Nevermind and then all of those, and then everything that followed started to crush that whole music scene, right? And took guitar solos out of music and things like that, and started saying, well, you're better off not knowing how to play very well. And it stopped being about guitar acrobats and things like that. But Helmet to me, at a time when I was seeing all these hair metal bands, and I was a huge White Lion fan and Poison and Def Leppard and Van Halen, um and then Helmet, when I would go see Helmet, I was like, oh my God, all these guys look like they work at the bank. Like it was my first time seeing a heavy rock band where they all just had short hair and wore t-shirts and didn't seem to care so much about what they looked like, and more was like, let's just groove. Let's just freaking groove hard. And it's all that open drop D stuff. Paige Hamilton's married to some famous actor as well. Some
I
famous
think he
actor.
was dating Winona Ryder at some
I
point.
think so, yeah. Yeah, he's got a really interesting history. Um, but it's so groovy and so heavy. That record in particular, when I was living with Grant Taylor from the Salads, um, which would have been around 1996. I think I was living with him for a couple of years. We shared a car. I had like a little VW Golf that we shared. It was my car, but I shared it with him. And it had the Meantime album stuck in the tape player. And
Nuts.
so it was the only record it was the only thing you could listen to in that car. And so it was all any of us ever listened to, right? So it was like you get in that car and that's what you're listening to, right? So we spent many years of that being the
You're lucky
only.
that that's what the album was. It wasn't one where you just tried a new album once and it was a horrible album that got stuck. At least it was like a great album.
Oh, it's so awesome, man. And it's the one band I would go to see and just couldn't help myself and would throw myself into the mosh pit and just go absolutely insane. And it's so groovy and heavy. I know Kevin Lyman, who ran Warp Tour, really got it because near the later Warp Tours, he started what he wanted to do to the tour was he wanted to start mixing the influential guys from the past with all the new stuff. And so that's when the tours would include Helmet. Like he had Helmet on an entire tour, and all the old guys like myself that were on that tour were all racing to go see Helmet every single time, but all the kids aren't. But what Kevin Lyman was trying to do was try to introduce like this, all the music you love, it all came from this band. And so there's tunes on that that record that have these big melodic, heavy chord things that are moving along that nobody was doing at the time. Um, and when I listen to Deftones, it just sounds like Helmet to me. When I listen to Korn, it sounds like Helmet to me. When I, all of most of those kind of heavy drop D bands, they sound like Helmet to me.
Apparently, there wasn't much drop D before Helmet. Is that
Well,
true?
there Eddie Van Halen was doing it,
Okay.
and same with Black Sabbath, and but it wasn't just that record's particularly funny because if you skip through it quickly, almost every song just starts with a big drop D chord, ja. You go to the next song, ja. You go to the next one, ja, and then it'll start with something else after that. But it's really really focused on that. That's a record that I've done it recently where I just put it into my recording setup over here just for fun to practice. And I can just play along to the entire record without having to learn anything, just because it's so in my head and I've got it figured out how they play like that and how it sounds like that. And so what I work on most of the time now is just trying to sound exactly like it, which is where you can play along and you don't even hear yourself anymore because you're so inside of that music that it disappears. So something you do when you're studying music, a really great thing to sort of train yourself for rhythm is you listen to a metronome. I don't know if you've ever tried this, and you just clap along with the metronome. If you're bang on enough with that metronome, you won't hear the metronome anymore. You cancel out the sound of the metronome. So you know you've got your rhythm exactly right if all you can hear is your clapping. You no longer can hear the click of the metronome. And it's the same thing when you're learning songs. I learned that playing with I Mother Earth because Jag wanted it to be exactly like the records. So I would learn that stuff note for note until I couldn't hear myself anymore. But now, like with something like Helmet, it's so ingrained in my soul that I can just put it on, play along, and it's completely lost inside of it. It's so cool. I love that record. And there's so much of that that the Salads have stolen from or borrowed from. There's so many Helmet riffs on Salad records from our every single album has Helmet riffs on it. So
So this is the band's major label debut. So they had an independent album that sold 40,000 copies independently, which is like a huge deal for an independent release. And it started a bidding war. So there's all these major labels after them after, 91 Nirvana blows up. Everyone's looking for the next Nirvana. So they got a $1.2 million advance as a part of this bidding war. Then this album comes out, 3 singles, Unsung, In the Meantime, and Give It. And it ends up selling over 2 million albums globally over time. So it was a big hit, but it seems like it was kind of the album that influenced all these other bands that would go on and be bigger than them over time.
oh yeah, that's totally the way it is. It's there's that amazing movie, Decline of the Western Civilization. Have you seen that?
I don't
It's
think
all
so.
about oh my gosh, go watch this movie. It's amazing because it's all about the Hollywood scene during the hair metal time and what it is. And they interview Ozzy. You've probably seen clips of it where Ozzy's talking to the camera and he misses the glass with his orange juice and he's pouring orange juice in the morning and stuff like that because he's still hungover. And but the point is just the transformation of music during that time and all of that. I can't remember exactly what we were talking about. I got so wrapped up in thinking about that movie. What were we just talking about?
I was just saying that it did sell 2 million copies, but it
Oh,
was
it
it
influenced.
was kind of
Yeah.
a slow build. It went gold and then globally after years it sold 2 million, but you could see that they influenced Korn that sold 40 million albums. They influenced Deftones that sold, I don't know, 20 million albums. So it's like
Oh, yeah.
because of them, all these other bands use
So
the
that's what I was going
template.
to say. Is in that Decline of the Western Civilization, one of the bands in that movie is the L.A. Guns, which is the birth of Guns N' Roses. It's the birth of Motley Crue. It's the birth, so the L.A. Guns in that movie say we're the band that turns people into rock stars, right? Like people come into our band and then they go somewhere else and they become a huge rock star. But we're like a jumping thing. And Fishbone is one of those bands too, right? Where people sort of jump off of what they do and become huge, copying them, right? And that's I don't know. That's music though, right? We all borrow. So
Have so Helmet has been described as the thinking man's metal band. Do you think that's an accurate description? Do you agree with
yeah, that's
this?
pretty good because it really makes you think hard. Because everything is really purposeful on that record because Page's or all their records, because Page is obviously capable of writing these incredible melodies. Um, but he chooses to go "Ah!" most of the time. Um, and for me at the time, it was like a rejection of all of that kind of high end singing that everybody was doing, where they were trying to hit the highest notes at the peak of the hair metal stuff. Like, who can sing the highest here? And sound a certain way. And he's just sort of like, bah, bah, screw all you guys, right? Like, but it's about feeling and attitude and groove. And it's so good. And yeah, there's so much groove metal after that, right? Like, I wonder if there would have been a Limp Bizkit without Helmet. I always wonder if there would have been a Deftones without Helmet or a Korn without Helmet. Like all of that groove metal that we all play. Would there be a 3 Days Grace? I don't know. Right? Like it's all of that with the salad. The salads definitely wouldn't have sounded like the salads without Helmet preceding us. Right. I've always Pantera's got that same sort of thing where it's like that groove metal. It's like metal, but it's groovy and makes you want to dance. It's the same thing that makes Van Halen so awesome. It's heavy and it's this crazy guitar, but it swings and it makes you kind of dance a bit. It's weird, right? It's like this metal music that makes you dance. But
It,
yeah, as a working man's metal, sure.
yeah, it
Yeah, because
it
they look more like working men too, right? Like, yeah.
it's cool that you mentioned Pantera because I went and watched the three music videos for the singles on this album, and I actually got a Pantera vibe. Like they were black and white, kind of performing in industrial warehouses. It had this intensity of a Pantera video. It's weird. Like
Yeah,
it does, they don't sound like Pantera, but just watching, just
they do
Pantera is
though.
the band that came to mind.
It's the same kind of, it's definitely the same kind of riffs. Like it's funny when the salads borrow from Helmet, we've done it where we borrow from Pantera in the same song. And so we'll go from like a Pantera riff into a Helmet riff and then into like some reggae or something, right? But we'll be going back and forth between those two bands because they are essentially playing the same music. Like um Korn's playing the same music too. It's all that Limp Bizkit's playing the same music. Blah, down, blah, down. And Helmet does it right. Da 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 da. And it's always something in that hole there and all of that, those sort of groovy drop riffs with holes with drums. I don't know, it's so groovy and good. Yeah, I'm a big groove metal fan.
So the first single from that album, Unsung, is the biggest hit of the band's career. It only went to number 29 on the Billboard Alternative Rock charts, but
Yeah.
still it was hugely influential. And I have a few things about that song here. So there's a review of the song from All Music that says Unsung was Helmet at their most focused, alternating between memorable verse and chorus melodies and concluding with a monolithic guitar workout featuring noisy, oddly harmonized chords repeatedly drilled into their listener's skull. So I thought that was kind of a
Well,
cool
that's all the harmonized chords
description.
that you hear like Deftones doing now, where it's these big heavy riffs, but there's these chordal movements happening below it, right? We did it at the end of Money, where it's like big chordal movements happening, but it's all metal guitars, right? So yeah.
And then it got some big placements in some notable video games like Saints Row, Madden, and Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, as well as three different Guitar Hero games. So it was a big hit in the video game world. And then Kerrang had it in its list of 666 songs you must own, and they had it at number 8 out of
Yeah, that's about right.
666,
I would
which
put
is
it up in the
crazy.
top 10 as well. Yeah.
So
Because
that's
it's just so heavy and groovy and it's so fun to play. That's why I love just sticking it on my through Pro Tools or whatever now, and just plugging my bass in and playing along with it because it's so groovy. And I'm maybe the world's worst drummer, but it's one of the few records I put on in headphones and play drums along to all the time because it's so fun. And the drumming is such a huge part of Helmet that was a weird part of Warp Tour, is that the drummer couldn't do a couple of the shows, the original drummer, and they got some drummer from one of the other huge metal bands on the tour to play with them. And all of a sudden, all the kids came to see Helmet because they wanted to see this other drummer. But all of us that grew up with Helmet are like, that doesn't sound quite right. But everybody else is like, this band is amazing, right? But it's funny how you need to do something like that to make young people interested. So
The second single, or the third single, In the Meantime, got nominated for a Grammy for Best Metal Performance, and the bands Soulfly and Lamb of God have covered that song over the years. I thought that was pretty cool.
oh, I've played it a whole bunch too. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
they're so fun. Those songs are so fun. Any sort of up and coming band, go play some Helmet songs. It's how you can learn space in music. I've spoken about how good Neil Sanderson is at production and hearing the quiet parts in music. That's what makes Helmet so amazing. It's the holes that are inside of it when they stop. And I used to love going to see them play when I was younger because they would hard pan everything too. So
Live?
you, yeah, so one guitar is on this side and the other guitar is on this side. So when they go John, jada jada John, jada jada John, and then it would all come in John like on either side, and oh, all right, and it sounded so good to me. And so I always wanted my bands to sound like that too. Like, let's just copy that. So
So a few more points and we'll move on to the next album. So the other guitarist in the band, Peter, his then wife at the time suggested for a band named Helmuth, like the German last name, and the singer he misheard and he thought she said helmet, and then thought helmet sounded like a cool band name. So
it's
it
a
was
good
supposed
band
it was
name.
Helmuth, which is
It's a
funny.
good heavy band name. I've never
Yeah.
really given it any
Well,
thought
it's like you
because,
got to wear a helmet when you listen to heavy music, you know?
or it's
Like,
just hard. It's hard,
oh,
like the
that's
music,
true.
right? And it's, but it's the thing that's cool about Helmet as well as their branding over the years, right? If you go back and you look at all of their album covers, and it's or their videos it's very similar to what you see with the Deftones, where it's consistent colors, consistent kind of ideas and feelings, and the sort of this imagery that is they're just so well branded too that it's like you go to a Helmet show, you want to buy the merch because it looks so great. The cover of that Meantime record is the design is amazing, right? It's that red with the white box around it, and then the rest of the record I think is blue and black of some image of some people doing something I don't even know,
There's
but it's
a guy shoveling some substance.
yeah,
Is you
okay,
can
but
barely
it's
make it
more
out
just
though.
the colors and the design of it. It really went in line with um almost like skate culture too, like skateboarding culture at the time, and the way that skateboarding clothes were looking, like drawers and all of the different brands of skate companies that were coming out, all of Tony Hawk's crew that were creating skate shirts, all of that, the Helmet stuff looked like that, right? So it sort of went along with that culture in my mind too. And it's, I don't know, but that's a big part of Helmet and the Deftones as well as all their branding, right? And Korn has always had great branding. And I think what's bringing Limp Bizkit back to people is they're so amazing at branding themselves, right? That if people will forget that they hated them before, and they're just like, this is branded so well, I need to go see them. He dresses up like a cowboy now, or he's dressing up like an old man, but really he's doing the same thing he always did. He's just such an incredible performer. And Fred Durst is undeniably a rock star, right? When you watch him, just his attitude and stuff, but they're just so genius at branding. Like we're a red hat backwards. is going to make you think Limp Bizkit, right? It's so brilliant. And Helmet's the same way. If I see those sort of shapes and stuff, I know what I'm getting, and there's a sound associated with it. And anyhow, I love it.
So I have some critical acclaim to share with you about the album. So All Music labeled the album Meantime, saying arguably one of the most influential and overlooked rock records of the 90s. And then we have The Sound of Meantime with Page Hamilton's riffs, the jazz influenced chords and solos, and dual voice singing style proved influential to nu metal and alternative metal bands. The album is considered a definitive influence in post metal. You have Kerrang that has it in their list of 50 most influential albums of all time. You have Rolling Stone has it on their list of 100 greatest metal albums of all time. Revolver has it on the 20 great albums of 1992. So just, you're not alone in loving this
Oh,
album.
I don't think
The
there would
critics
be
love it.
I don't think there'd be a Linkin Park without Helmet. And Linkin Park was the biggest selling band of what, 2000 to 2010 or in the world. They're the
And he
biggest
he
band, I
actually
think.
worked with them apparently. Page
Yeah,
Hamilton.
it
Yeah.
makes a ton of sense. I bet he played guitar on their records, and we you know, it's um yeah, because I remember it's funny when Linkin Park came out, I was like, oh, okay, someone's mixing the Backstreet Boys with heavy metal now. That's what's happening, right? Like we're taking this pop music and mixing it, but it really, we're talking about the same thing. It's funny because our conversation, that's what Jump was doing, right? And that's kind of what Helmet was doing, because they were taking this aggressive metal, but then singing these nice melodic things over it, and then these big open beautiful chord changes that would happen sometimes, right? But yeah, really, really interesting. And I guess Linkin Park was doing kind of the same thing, right? Where you're mixing metal with groove, with
A little hip hop.
pop music, with a little bit of hip hop and all of that stuff, right? Like it's still all that same stuff. You know, there were a couple bands that came out during those times that taught all of us that anything was possible. And I think Helmet was one of those, where it's just go be yourself, just go do anything you want. Right. And they were like that. Um, Definitely Jane's Addiction was like that too, where it came out around the same time and it was just so different and so counter to everything else that we were hearing, that it was like, oh, I can do this too. Right. And I Mother Earth is, there you go. It's like Canada's Jane's Addiction meets Canada's Van Halen, all wrapped into one.
So I have one final thing, and I think you will be happy to know this if you don't already know this, that Helmet released their ninth album called Left last month. So there's a brand new
Yeah.
Helmet album, if you didn't know, which I didn't know because I wasn't familiar with the band
Oh
before.
yeah, I listen to it all the time. Yeah.
Okay. Is it solid?
It's good. I it's funny. I don't like the production as much as what they used to do, and maybe I just need to give it more time. But I love the production on those earlier records. That there's something spongy about them. So maybe they were recorded on analog, because the time I imagine that Meantime would have been recorded to tape. I bet. And I bet it went through tubes and a great big old soundboard as well. And so it has this softness, this spongy feeling to it. The first and the new one is, even though it's groovy and it's kind of cool and has some good tunes, it's more in your face instead of this spongy bottom to it. But it's still good. It's still
Okay.
good. And I went and saw them 2 years ago or something. They did a celebration of 22 years or something like that, where they would play 22 songs in 22 small venues around the world in 22 different countries or something like that. And I went and saw them at the Horseshoe in Toronto. It was amazing. They went and holy crap. It was, and the amazing thing is I went with Darren Pfeiffer's ex-wife, Vicky, who was who turned out to be Helmet's label rep back during the Meantime era. She was their label rep, and I was sitting with Vicky, and I went with Vicky and Darren from the Salads, and Paige on stage was making fun of Vicky the whole, like, which husband are you on now and stuff like that. Like I can't remember and stuff. And it was like, wow, I'm connected to this guy somehow. And I had to go, but I could have hung out with him that night and just sort of spend time. And it's funny. It's like the universe has been trying to draw me towards Paige Hamilton because I was asked to go, like, come and hang out. We'll have a drink, and I've got to go home. I can't. There was a time in 1996 when I was living with Grant. Um, and our manager at the time was the festival director for CPI, which is now Live Nation. Um, and and he called us and asked if we wanted to. He asked me and another guy if we wanted to go play golf with Paige Hamilton. Do you want to go golfing with Paige, who's the singer from Helmet? Do you want to go golfing with Paige? And I said, I don't know how to golf. So I didn't know how to golf, so I didn't go. But I've been invited to hang out with Paige twice now, right? That's just more proof that the things you obsess over, right? That the only record I listened to for 3 years will gravitate towards you if you just stay focused on them long enough, right? Like so weird how that works,
You're
isn't it?
always like one person away from your idols, and
Well,
with
you're
the
always
with the option of being there with your idol as well.
yeah, it's always within your grasp. It's always there. Yeah. And it's funny, sometimes people just hand it to you on a platter and you're like, nah, I'm not hungry. Right? Like, yeah.